I feel like in the last few years, writing for my people, for bands that I'm in, I've been able to achieve what I always imagined I wanted music to do much more closely than I ever did growing up writing pieces for other people or anything like that. So, it doesn't take anything away from that mode of making music, but I've just found I've been able to kind of get to what I want music to do, what makes me like, yeah, I found my thing that's like, I'm so excited to have made it and share it with people when I've made music in a kind of band leading format or co-band leading format. I heard that Herbie Hancock always tells the engineer to start recording, like
Oh, yeah?
the minute the band gets in the room, like when they're still getting sounds and stuff, because like a lot of the best stuff comes right then when people don't even know they're recording it.
And probably at the end while they're all leaving and pack it up,
Maybe
there's some percussion they can get. But you worked with, speaking of Herbie Hancock, you worked recently with Wayne Shorter, right? Who recently passed away.
I did, yeah. I had this kind of opportunity fall out of the sky back in 2019, and I ended up working on his opera with Esperanza and with Wayne. And then coming out of that, I ended up scanning basically all the music that Wayne wrote in his life. And I'm kind of now working with Wayne's widow Carolina and some publishing companies to figure out how to get that music out to the world, how to organize it, what to do with it. And I'm kind of currently the kind of keeper of that,
You're
of
like
those
the
materials. Yeah.
Wow. And how did that all get started? How did you start working with Wayne?
Well, I started working with Wayne because I met Esperanza. I was the class pianist in her songwriting class at Harvard. Like, I just happened to have that gig, and I met her through that. She invited me to do it again the next year, but the next year, she actually ended up needing to cancel the course to go focus on this opera that she was working on with Wayne. I didn't know about it at the time, and that was going to put me out of that little gig, and she was nice enough to say, well, let's figure out some other work that you can do so that this isn't lost income for you, which was really cool of her. A lot of professors would have just said, sorry, whatever. And then basically one thing led to another. She learned a little bit more about me, that I was also a composer and had some, engraving skills and whatever. And she invited me to come to a workshop they were doing like in a couple weeks after that out in LA. And that's how I started getting involved in the piece, and my role just kind of grew from there. And I was helping out with various things, playing piano, making the score, doing a little conducting when it was needed, whatever was needed, just kind of like helping out with the creation of this crazy piece that came together in this crazy method. And then from there, like we did the show, we did the opera the premiere was in Boston, then we did it in DC, then Berkeley, California, then LA. So after Wayne lives in LA. So after the two shows in LA, the next day, I think it was a Sunday, we went up to Wayne's house and we were like, Wayne, you've been talking about this orchestral music you have, like everyone in the group, kind of core people in Wayne's world, like they were aware of some of these pieces. But it turns out when we went up to his house to ask him about this work and see what he had, there was way more than any one of us realized. There's like 20 orchestral pieces.
Of pieces that are like handwritten on manuscript paper?
Yeah, and wow. They've all been performed at least once. It's not like he was except for one of them, or maybe one or two. But yeah, it's not like he was just writing them and putting them in a drawer. Like he had a commission or a project that they were for. He wrote them, he had the performance, and then they went in the drawer. And since the music wasn't published, there was no way for basically any other orchestra to find out, or any other conductor to find out that it existed. So, it's just kind of sitting there, and some of it would get done every now and then. A couple pieces were really championed, like Gaia. Gaia would get around. Some of the music did get around, some of it got recorded, but there was a lot more there than anyone realized. So we immediately realized, like, step one, we gotta just scan all this stuff so that it's protected, because there's like a gold mine of stuff here that, if there's a flood or a fire or whatever, it's going to be gone. So we put together a little money for me to go out there and do that, and that's how that happened. And I also was like tracking down. I was like looking at the bottoms of like, oh look, here's a phone number. That's probably the copyist. Let me text that. Okay. Oh yeah. And then I like would find through like some emails and kind of investigative work, I was able to track down like who made the Sibelius or Finale files on a bunch of the stuff. Carolina was able to find some old emails, when she'd gotten forwarded the parts and whatever. So we were able to find actual notation software files for a bunch of the stuff, but not everything, and kind of put together this hodgepodge archive of Wayne Shorter's concert works.
You had to make sure that the files match actually what he wrote and that kind of thing. So you're kind of like really like an editor, like somebody looking over old Beethoven stuff or making sure tempo markings are the same.
Yeah,
things like that.
It can feel like that sometimes. And so one bit of news, which I think we're allowed to share, is that
I like to break news here.
Schott, the European publisher, is gonna take on Wayne's concert works.
Wow.
And promote them, and
that's
add
a big
them
deal
to the catalog. So that's really great. But Clark Rundle, who's been the kind of main conductor doing Wayne's work for the last decade or so, and I are gonna have this kind of role, just shepherding the materials, making sure they're in the right state. Wayne's no longer here, so questions about is that a B flat or a B natural, or is that a slur or not, or whatever, they're gonna kind of be filtered through Clark and I, and through these materials that we have.
Do you know if any of the pieces are getting played soon, like any of these orchestral pieces?
There is a kind of 90th birthday tour program that's been going around. It's happening in London. It already happened in Poland. It's happening at the BSO, I believe. There's several performances that have about 5 or 6 of these. It's like an all Wayne Shorter orchestral program that's happening. And I should mention that all these pieces, they're orchestra plus the Wayne Shorter Quartet, as quasi soloists. But what I find so genius, one of the many genius things about these works, it's super simple. But when many people try to write like orchestra plus jazz group or something like that, they do what would be the obvious thing to do. They make a part for the quartet or for the ensemble. And okay, that can work fine. But what Wayne does, which I find so interesting, is he doesn't make a part. The band just plays off a reduction of the orchestral part. Or actually, the way Wayne writes is he writes like on a grand staff first, the whole piece, then he orchestrates it and adds many layers, adds a lot of counterpoint. But the band just gets that original reduction. So they don't have it's not like they play now, they don't play now. It's an orchestral piece that could work without the quartet, actually. But the quartet is there the entire time, weaving their way through.
Wow. And
it creates this truly kind of unique and unified world where it's not, because what happens sometimes when we try to mix these forms is we get, well, this is the orchestra part and this is the jazz part, and they never really become a coherent one thing. It becomes them and then them. And so by the simple fact of not making a part and just having them play off a reduction and just work their magic in the cracks, double things when they want to, play against it when they want to.
And it can also change from performance to performance.
Absolutely.
But
and
it's
not just like in a solo section, like the solo's different, but like a lot can change.
Yeah, from beat to beat even.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, this reminds me a lot of like what you're doing in your work now, because you're doing this kind of similar thing with your piece. If I can remember the title, Abiding Memory, or if the title changes.
No, that's still the title of the whole work.
Yeah, because in the first part of this piece, you do exactly this. So this mentorship, I guess, from Wayne is going straight into your music, but it doesn't sound like any of his music, though.
No, but I think that's right. I am interested in the thing of writing a full-fledged thing that's, like on a grand staff, dense. It's got, I often write in a kind of 4-part thing, actually, like SATB, even if it's just like for piano. I just kind of think that way sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's like this fully written out thing. And then I just give it to a band. And it's not like, okay, saxophone plays this voice and guitar plays that voice and bass plays that voice. Or I just say, okay, this is the world that we're in, that we're gonna, spend our time in. We're gonna loop this section 5 times, and then we're gonna go on to this section and whatever, or we're gonna go on cue. But people find their way, and it's very hard to write that out. And
it's impossible.
Yeah.
And plus, you got to have the right people.
You got to have the right
with
people.
You. So let's hear a couple minutes of
that.
Okay. Yeah. No, you were saying, like, when you look at the score, when you just saw the score there, you see, if you didn't know what it sounded like, it looks like everybody's playing the same exact thing. But that's not what's going on. So you saw this kind of technique from the Wayne Shorter example. Is that kind of where that came from?
I mean, that's
Or was it
definitely
kind of...
that's definitely one reference point for sure. I think there are other reference points too. I mean, even like the way, and again, like the surface level sound of this music will be completely different. But there'll be like Anthony Braxton pieces who's another big influence of mine, where you'll have everyone kind of like looping a melody but kind of ornamenting it, almost like a heterophony thing, but
like non-Western music.
Yeah, and they find their way, and then you can kind of get off, or you can like extrapolate just you're no longer playing the actual pitches, but you're just playing the contour, and then the thing kind of builds and grows, and I mean, that kind of stuff is in the air with a lot of the music that that's in my background for sure.
I mean, when you're working with these musicians, I mean, their ability to read has to be like top notch too, because I know a lot of sometimes some of these musicians, because the rhythms are extremely complex. Do you have trouble sometimes with the reading, or do they have to kind of memorize it, internalize it? Because these rhythms, I mean, even for a seasoned, ear training person, these are hard things to practice.
Definitely.
Sure.
I mean, having good reading chops is part of playing at least some of my music for sure. But I don't just work with people like, okay, you're gonna be on this one performance and we're gonna have one rehearsal and then the gig and then I never talk to you again. That's like the people who you just heard playing that music. That's my band. So we've been playing that music over and over again. We rehearse a lot when we have new material. So it's like I learn the music with them. I teach them the music. It's like they're not like, let me shed this 5/3 or whatever and come in nailing it at the first rehearsal. Like you kind of need that to accomplish just the way in like a lot of new music, you gotta know it at the first rehearsal or else it's gonna fall apart. That's not like that with my band. Like I completely accept, and not only accept, encourage that like we're actually learning this stuff together. We're looping like literally 2 or 3 bars for like 15 minutes so that we can really internalize it. We're never quite memorizing. We always need the paper because it's complex enough, at least there, but we're not reading. The paper's like, oh yeah, this phrase happens, and then this phrase, and we know them inside. So yeah, this stuff is internalized, and that's the only way we can play it without playing it. Because we're playing through these phrases. Like somebody might catch 2 beats of the melody and then rest, and then play something that goes against what's there, and then play like 1 note of the melody and hold it. And it's like the only way you can do that is if you have it inside your bones.
And if you're micromanaging it too, if you're like writing every single thing down, it's not going to sound exactly like how it would sound if you did it the way you did it, right? Like if you transcribed it, because you did that kind of stuff too, where you would transcribe something that you played. You would play something
for sure
that would be in that style that you're mentioning. You transcribe it, and then it's got like this very exact kind of notation, but it's what you played, right? Because you did it the opposite way too. We'll play that piece next.
Yeah, so Rag Out is kind of a funny piece. I wrote a period rag. Like I tried to write a rag that sounded like Scott Joplin, and then I learned it, and then I just improvised in the world of it.
Yeah,
I kind of followed the form a little bit, followed the contours. I like to think of this kind of thing that I do as like graffiti. Like the object is there, and then I put more things. I spray paint on top of it with like another message, and then it coexists, the original thing and the extra thing. So you're always hearing the original piece, that sort of text, and you're always hearing my reaction kind of with it, against it, on top of it, around it. And I'm very much like reacting to myself and what I hear like a second before.
So this right here that we're about to hear is the original rag that you wrote that's in the style of Scott Joplin, right? So you took this rag that you created and then you did the next thing that we're about to hear based on that, right?
That's right.
Okay, great. Let's hear the first rag now. And now let's hear your improvised version of that original rag that you wrote.
Performance you will have just heard is my original performance, but I've also then transcribed that performance and have a notated score which has not been performed yet, but there is a pianist who has started to learn it.
God help him.
And there's actually several pieces that go along with that in a set that I've written either in that exact method or a similar method of kind of like improvising and then transcribing the result pretty meticulously.
I don't think I've ever had anyone that's so into like the jazz world and also making music in this collaborative way. Most people that I have on are more like me. We just kind of sit by ourselves and do our thing. So I was really excited to have you on. Yeah. Because this is like totally foreign to me. This is not the way I make music at all. But I have a lot to learn from it.
So how do you make music?
How do I make? I mean, it's boring. It's not boring to me, but if somebody was watching me do it, they would be like, "Wow, that is a boring job. You just sit all day by yourself."
I mean, that's not that different from me. I mean, yesterday or the day before, I managed to write 1.5 bars of music in a whole afternoon because. Yeah, I do that too.
You do that too?
I very much so do that too.
You're in the same boat. Okay, I feel better. It sounds fun to be in a room with people that are really good musicians and they could really read down the stuff that you're playing. And that seems like a luxury to me.
Definitely. I mean, I think you know this, but like I came up, at least half of my training and education was very much as a contemporary music composer. I went and got a master's degree in that. I actually applied to several PhDs a few times, so that's very much a part of my thing, my background, and it's still how I kind of see music sometimes. Like those influences are a big deal for me when I'm making a score, even for like a jazz context. I'm intentional in the ways that one would be with it, like in a new music context. But I haven't like written for other people when I'm not going to be in the performance in like years at this point. Like that feels like a foreign thing to me at this point. And I have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah,
like a part of me is like, I would love it if some great string quartet came along and was like, write us a piece. And like that hasn't been happening to me recently. But a part of me is like, I don't really even want that anyway, because I've found this way to reach this kind of music that I've been able to create this other way that I feel is only achievable with my people, with my band, where I'm playing in it, where we get to rehearse a lot, which you basically never get to do in quote unquote new music, and achieve certain things that way. So I feel a tension there, both in like kind of musical practices that exist in the world and traditions, but also in myself and like what I want to do. I have ideas every now and then for like a piece I would want to write for instruments that would not involve me playing with a band, or that would involve certain types of things that, you know, more new music people would do. But I usually kind of brush those ideas aside more, because I have so many things that I want to write that are for, you know, a group that is my group, or that I want to start. I wonder whether I've been forced or not. And at this point, I don't really care, but I just kind of wonder, because I'm like, you know, I say to myself, I don't really want to write for some new music ensemble. But then I'm like, wait, am I just saying that because I don't have those opportunities? And actually, I'd be super excited to do that if someone came along and asked me. Probably also true. So it's somewhere in between. I don't really know. But I can say, whatever is going on there, I feel like in the last few years, writing for my people, for bands that I'm in, I've been able to achieve what I always imagined I wanted music to do much more closely than I ever did growing up writing pieces for other people, or, you know, or anything like that. So, you know, it doesn't take anything away from that mode of making music, but I've just found I've been able to kind of get to what I want music to do, what makes me like, yeah, I found my thing that's like, I'm so excited to have made it and share it with people. When I've made music in a kind of band leading format or co-band leading format.
I mean, I have to say personally, like when I listened to that first excerpt that we played, I mean, to me, this was like, sounds like a voice or a sound that sounds like I haven't heard like a lot of your work, right? Until I was prepping for the show. But to me, out of all the pieces that you showed me, this one was like, wow, this is like something that I feel like he took from all these other pieces I heard, because actually that was the last thing that I heard.
Right.
And then I heard all the other things that you sent me. I said,
right.
Oh, this is like all of that,
right,
but in that piece.
Yeah,
and
it feels like
it's
that to
not
me
too
too.
much either. It's like everything is in that. It's like a manifesto almost.
It feels like that to me too. And you know, I think it's no accident that like the people who are in my band who played that piece are very much like me. They have training in new music. They have training in jazz. They can read. They can improvise. They know about music from around the world. They can play groove-based music. Like, they have a similar breadth of activities they're doing that make them capable of pulling that off. And I mean, there are definitely lots of amazing musicians out there. I don't think there's that many out there who could really play that music. And so that's what I want to write. I got to find those people and write for them and kind of just let everything else be.
Yeah, but then that kind of stuff inspires other people coming up.
Definitely.
Say, oh, this is possible. Because there's also a lot of music from like the 70s or even before. I mean, we don't have to talk about just the 20th century.
Right.
We can talk about music that came way before that wasn't really possible, or not possible, but many people didn't know. It wasn't in their vocabulary.
Right.
You know? And now people are playing it like it's nothing.
Right.
And I feel like this is the kind of stuff these are the kind of moments that we as composers strive for.
Get excited about.
Yeah. It's like, oh, this is like on the edge. I feel it's on the edge now, right. But watch in 20 years, 10, 20 years, this is going to be nothing.
Oh, definitely.
In 10, 20 years, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Quartet for the End of Time or Pierrot Lunaire took 40 rehearsals with a conductor or whatever when it was first done. And now it's like every college ensemble can pull it off with one rehearsal or whatever, you know.
Well, the Stravinsky Rite of Spring, I mean, that's the classic example, or the late Beethoven string quartets.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go on and on.
Yeah. Not that I'm claiming to be on that level or anything, but no,
that's the aspiration. If we don't have anything to aspire to, it's almost like what's the point? At least to me, it's like and the people that I like, it's like I feel like they're aspiring, or for something, and you know.
Yeah.
And most of us are quite young, you know. So it's like, well, we have the nice thing is we have a whole lifetime to try to figure it out. It doesn't mean we have to figure it out, but try it. At least try is the fun of it.
Definitely.
And I hear that in your stuff.
Thank you, man.
It's especially chronologically going through every piece, you know.
I feel like I was one way that I was trying to bring together, or in retrospect, I don't think I realized this while writing that music, but you know, I grew up playing classical piano music. It's a huge part of my upbringing, and I used to practice that repertoire a lot, and then I kind of stopped when I never thought I was going to be a concert pianist or everything, but I was working on other stuff. I was composing more. I was improvising more. And then I kind of came back to practicing a bit of classical music again in the last few years. And just this simple thing kind of dawned on me that like there's this special thing that kind of standard repertoire classical piano music does that nothing else does. And it just has to do with how rubato and time work. Not even a string quartet can do it. An orchestra certainly can't do it. It's just this special thing from that period of music. When you hear Richter take a phrase in a piece of Schubert and just delay it by just the right amount of milliseconds, and then the note, it's just magic. And like it can only be done by one person, because if there's more than one person, then you have to coordinate. And it's just not quite the same, even though it can also be beautiful with, ensembles doing that kind of thing.
Well, you did you did this exact thing in one of your other pieces, Filters. This exact kind of thing with rubato and not being timed. Let's hear a couple minutes of that.
Sure. One thing I think I realized in retrospect I was going for in the abiding memory stuff is I wanted to approximate the sound of a band, a band with drums, like doing that thing from classical piano music.
Okay.
And so I wrote it out in a sense. Like I basically, those crazy rhythms you see, they're written out rubatos in a sense, or they're written out micro timings of how you deal with a phrase, and I wanted to kind of explode that onto a larger ensemble. What would it sound like for? We even talked while we were mixing the record, like, should this sound like a jazz quintet, or should it sound like piano plus a band? Piano plus is what we called it. And there are points in the record where we were thinking, okay, the mixing should sound like a quintet, and other parts of the mixing should sound like piano plus.
Interesting.
And
almost like a reverb. It's like the other instruments are like in the air.
Yeah, they're like part of the piano, like part of the fantasy piano that also has guitars and cellos in it, and drums, which is, I think, the biggest strange thing.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of part of, in retrospect, after kind of looking back on the music, I realized that's part of what I was going for.
Yeah, if you close your eyes and don't look at the score, you would never guess that it looks like that on paper either. That's the other thing about it too. The Filters piece that we just played, I thought it was interesting in the fact that it's way more sparse down in terms of the notation, but also kind of, if I close my eyes and don't look at the notation, I could tell it's by the same guy that wrote the memory piece. So the abiding memory piece. Yeah. So I find that really strange for me to experience that as someone that reads scores all the time.
Right.
While I'm always reading. Maybe it's a bad thing actually to always read scores while listening, because it screws with my perception. But that was my experience listening to those back to back.
I mean, I wondered when I was writing filters, I came very close, like a number of times, to deciding what the actual rhythm was going to be for these phrases and like writing it down. And I even took my own recordings of it and would like pick what felt like the master tempo and try to decide where all the notes fell. And I mean, that's often how I come up with these rhythms that I put in some of the other pieces we've talked about. Figure out what is the tuplet, and it just never, it was wrong. It just wasn't right for that music. And I don't have the kind of master theory when it's right to do that and when it's not. It's very much an intuition thing. But yeah, in that piece, it just was right to do that in a kind of space-time thing and allow the moment to decide, I'm going to bring this in a little bit earlier than I usually do. I'm going to let this sit a little bit longer. But you're right in that, like, in the character, in the essence, even though the score looks so different, one is like just dots with no stems and no time, and the other thing's got like sevens in the spaces of fives and whatever. It's actually very similar music.
Yeah, it's remarkably similar, and that's what screwed up with me. I'm like, wait. So it's almost more about the process then, in a way. Yeah. I mean, I like how it sounds, don't get me wrong, but also the process is, that example, I feel like, especially for folks watching the show with the score and seeing both of those, it's like the process is just as important as what you come up with. I think your two examples next to each other is a great example of that.
I mean, I'm glad you said that, because I hadn't quite made that connection myself yet, and that's interesting to hear.
Yeah. Then a piece like that, I feel like, would be something that would filter out more, excuse the pun, to other new music ensembles or ensembles that are more typically, have 2-3 rehearsals and that's it.
Right.
You can have that, because there's a version of this piece with piano plus, like what you were talking about before,
right.
And it seems like the instrumentation could be open. I mean, I know you have a specific
I have a version of that filters that we just heard that it is for just me playing the part plus any number of additional instruments spaced throughout the physical performance space. And they basically have the score, and their instructions, in essence, are to double any individual line of the counterpoint for some amount of time, then stop, and then jump back in later. So we've actually done a performance of that in a church a couple of years ago in Brooklyn with, I think it was 13 people. And we had people all spaced around the church, and we had winds and strings and a theremin and an electric guitar and a contralto clarinet and a bunch of different instruments.
Yeah.
But it's tricky because I'm I'll be completely honest. I'm undecided in my own mind whether it works. Not because of I think the orchestration effect is beautiful, to have every moment the orchestration is slightly shifting in this way that would be quite cumbersome to write out, or maybe even impossible. But it kind of works. It gets thinner, it gets thicker, the winds take over, the strings take over, and it just evolves like that over a long amount of time in kind of this undulating way. But the timing of the notes is really tricky, because the way we had to rehearse that piece is people came over to my place and basically played along with me and had to internalize what I do. But that meant that I had to be much more confined in what I do. I have to be really consistent. More predictable. And I noticed in that when I listened back to the recording of what I played there, of that performance that I mentioned in the church, I'm not only more strict, I'm actually more sort of declarative in the way I have to be very this is where the note is. This is where the note is. You have to physically show it. I have to physically show it, and it had an effect on my playing. And maybe it's just something I got to practice and figure out how to play with the same amount of subtlety as when I do it solo piano, and the same kind of pianicism, and still communicate the sort of timing of the notes to the group. Or maybe it's not possible. That's an open question to me, and I'm kind of interested to get another shot at it, to try that out.
I liked hearing both versions of it. I liked that it exists.
Yeah.
But I did prefer the solo piano version.
Yeah.
But I didn't know why. But I think you outlined the reason why.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's also a better record. It's also really, the solo piano one's really well recorded. The other one, is in this church and I don't know, but
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think this whole idea of Piano Plus is interesting because I had Timo Andrus on a few weeks ago, and it's funny because it's almost similar in a way because everything centers around the piano, but he obviously is extremely different aesthetic than you are, and the way he makes music is different than you are. But you guys are both like monsters at the piano. So to have two extremely different versions of what like a composer pianist can be, I think it just shows how varied it is, because you would think, okay, composer pianist means one thing, but it could mean a lot of different things.
Oh, there's so many composer pianists in the history of our music, and yeah, I mean there's definitely more than a few ways to skin that cat.
But nowadays, it's rare that you have a composer that is extremely proficient at an instrument.
You think?
In general. Maybe because I'm around. Maybe because I'm in the ivory tower too long.
Yeah.
Maybe because I've been in school.
I feel like it's making a comeback because I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like it used to be the norm, right? Like going way back, all composers were great instrumentalists.
Chopin,
yeah, and even the ones who weren't famous virtuosos,
Mm-hmm.
Like say Mozart, he was still like a competent violist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, even for those who weren't like. Maybe Liszt was probably more known for his performance than his composition during his own time. Even for those for whom that wasn't true, like they were all performers too. That kind of stopped happening at some point, 20th century or whatever. But I feel like it's making a comeback again. I don't know if that's because new music itself is opening itself up in a healthy way to more aesthetics and more traditions, which bring in people from musical backgrounds where being a performer it's like, what do you mean? That's what being a composer is. It is being a performer. Like, I think we're the exception in new music of, separating the two. It's like in most music around the world, it's like there's no such thing as a composer who isn't a performer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Especially when I tell people, when they ask me, what do you do? I'm like, I usually don't even tell them I'm a composer.
Right.
I just tell them I'm a teacher.
Right.
It's just easier to explain.
Why do you do that?
Because inevitably, if I say I'm a composer or a musician, or especially if I'm a composer,
so what instrument?
So what instrument do you play? I don't really play any instrument. Like what?
Huh?
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a writer, but I don't use a pencil, or I don't use or I don't know how to read, or something crazy. It's like something like that I said, So I just say I'm a teacher, which is probably what I do most of the time anyway.
Right.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting for you because you have all this education, and then you're going to this route that perhaps, I don't know what your bandmates in terms of the education that they have. But I mean, you went to Harvard, you went to NEC, and I think you went also overseas, right? To the Guildhall. So you have a ton of education and bring it into this kind of music. I know, I feel the same way. But I think that marriage, that's what's special about what makes your music tick. Because you have to have kind of left brain, right brain, and that kind of thing. See, for me, I have like one side of my brain. I just thinking too much. I don't have that spontaneous, or even like not even spontaneous, not the right word. It's that ability to play and that ability to collaborate and that ability also to feed ideas off of other people and not just you being the center of your world. I think this is something that was going on in music for a long time. And like what you said, everywhere around the world.
But I think all these things are double-edged or double-sided, because I often feel limited by the fact that I'm a pianist. I'm like, I find myself, because first of all, I basically can only write music at the piano. I mean, I need to hear the thing like right there, and that presents all kinds of obvious potential limitations. But that's not even the main thing. The main thing is like, I often feel like I think. Pianistically, I think in terms of the way sound happens on the piano. Like I often don't think of simple stuff like notes coming out of nothing and getting, it's just like I
noticed you don't really do that.
That's like, it's like because the piano
does do that.
Yeah, my pianos go ding like and then like all my music has notes that do that. Like even when that's not for the piano.
Sustain, release.
So like that's like obviously I'm a little bit aware of it, but it's like I think like a pianist. And okay, that's cool. A lot of the best music ever was written for piano, so that's cool. But there's also a lot of other things out there that are not. They're at least not front of mind when I go sit down to write.
So you were saying before, the other day or yesterday, you were writing. Took you like a whole afternoon to write a bar and a half, right?
Yeah.
Which I mean, I've had days like that. But do you find
Most
that playing the piano doesn't help in that, being able to process what you're thinking out? Because I have a problem with that. Like I have a problem processing what I'm thinking to what the notes are. Sometimes it takes me a while to figure out what I'm thinking, or even like the inability to play some of these things slows me down. And I think that's part of the reason why you have like most film composers, I think they're all like amazing pianists. And a lot of them are jazz pianists.
Yeah.
And because they can just like fire away. Like to me, that's how I think, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't even know quite how to address it because like I think something changed in my composing at some point in the last 5 or something years where I used to maybe write a line and then write another line, and I would try them on the piano, and I maybe wasn't quite sure how they fit together yet, and they weren't quite so easy to play together, but I don't really do that anymore. I kind of like now everything I write on the paper is something that I was able to get my hands to do first. So it's like I'm here in the piece, I'm like, okay, let's go here, or let's go there, or let's go here. All right, I like that one. Okay, what is it again? It's that one. Yep, okay, it's that one. All right, let me write it down. So like that's what like on a super micro level, like that's what composing looks like to me most of the time. It also looks like improvising, and then going back and being like, I like that part. What was it? But even then, I like that part. What was it? Okay, now let me slow it down again to that point, and it looks just like what I said a second ago. So because of that, it's like everything is something I played really slowly. Everything that I write down before I write it down. So I almost think of, we talk about this composition, improvisation, spectrum, binary,
it's more
whatever.
subtle than that, though. Yeah.
It's, that's like obviously a big topic today. For me, composition, and this is, I'm not saying this as it is this, but for me, composition is extremely slowed down improvisation, not the other way around. Some people say improvisation is real-time composition. Sure, that makes sense too. But for me, actually, the other way of formulating it, it feels more like it matters to me to say that more. Yeah. That like composition is really slowed down improvisation, where I'm just like improvising really slowly until I'm like, yeah, that's the one.
And then speed it up later.
Yeah,
or even not. Later. I would be interested too. Now that you mentioned that, I mean, what would it sound like if you're one, not every piece, but one piece is a rendering of that process. Because it is in line with a lot of the way you think about other things too. It's not just an experiment; it is the way you work. So I kind of wonder in my head, I mean, I don't mean the piece to be 6 hours long, but
probably would be.
A snippet of that. I wonder what would it sound like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I kind of know what it would sound like because it sounds like my voice memos in my phone a lot of the time.
You know what it sounds like, but nobody else does. Yeah. That's the thing.
There are these tapes of Monk practicing, and he kind of does. I mean, part of what I feel like permission for me was hearing those tapes because he plays his own compositions like over and over again. And I'm like, yeah, so I get to do that too.
There's a recording of me really badly playing I Mean You on piano. God, in high school, it was so bad. But I know these recordings you're talking about because when I was studying those, it was just, and also him singing along with himself. You can really tell what he's thinking. Yeah. While he's playing.
I heard once that Takemitsu used to play through the entire St. Matthew Passion on the piano before starting a new piece, and that he also wasn't that good of a score reader or a pianist, so that it was like, it's not like it was easy for him.
Is he trying to put himself into depression or something by doing that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think what he was trying to do was create a space for ideas to come. But I don't know. What do you think he was trying to do?
I don't know. I don't like having anything in front of me. Like my desk looks like that all the time. Right. It's just like it looks like a hospital. It's just like completely blank. I can't think of having any kind of music entering my mind before or after. Yeah, it's very hard for me to do that. I mean, the only time I did do that was with the last piece I wrote, this piece for orchestra. I'm really bad with rhythm. I'm like terrible with rhythm. I can't figure out rhythm for the life of me. So I had this piece by my teacher, Georg Haas, called Viter and Viter and Viter, continue on and continue on, continue on. And he had this crazy way of organizing time, like in a micro way and in a macro way. So I kind of just took like a section of that and said, okay, I like this. Is there a way I can incorporate this kind of feeling in my piece? That's the only time really where I felt like I really needed something like that.
Interesting.
Because I just don't know how to do it. It's not in my toolbox. Like,
don't know how to do what?
Like I don't know how to use rhythm in a very in a way that with an argument, if that makes sense. Melody, harmony, timbre, form, even. I think I have ways of thinking.
What do you mean by rhythm? You like what
literally, like why should this melody or this harmony or this? Why should this section have these rhythms? Like, what's the difference between da 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 and da 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 or?
So what do you do to solve that? I mean,
I don't know. I'm just like guessing. I have no idea. I'm just guessing, or looking at other pieces and see how they do it. I haven't internalized it like the way you've internalized some of these rhythms.
Have you ever thought about not using rhythm
at all?
I don't know.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
What does not using rhythm mean?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're having this thing, like, I feel if you're saying, tell me if this isn't what you're saying, but if you're saying on some level that, like, the rhythmic choices feel arbitrary or they feel like they're not.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. So then, like, don't choose. I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
but then it sets up that problem from before that when you have 2 or 3 rehearsals, you got to choose something.
Yeah.
See, I have the opposite problem as you. I have to get the thing done in 2 or 3 rehearsals. So it makes me choose. But then when I'm choosing, I have to be honest, I don't know why I chose that. It's just because I had to choose something. I can tell you why I chose the harmonies that I chose.
Right.
I'm making an argument with the harmonies. But I can't really tell you besides, I just like how this sounds.
Have you ever tried to write a piece that's only rhythm?
Only rhythm? Like I have no music for percussion. For
percussion or like a one note piece or something?
No, I haven't done any of that, but that's probably something I should do to grow,
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
And then you should write a string quartet.
Yeah, exactly. I should.
We have the opposite problem. Why don't you take
let's do
why don't I use your band and then you can...
No, we really should.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that, no, it's good to have you on because I needed to break it up a little bit, I feel like, with some of the guests that I've had because I really want a variety of stylistic aesthetics on this show, because most of it is people that are, I have to admit, people from the ivory tower, people that have their doctorates, and not everybody is like that, Yeah. And I've had a couple film composers on. Yeah. One of them that Yeah. But I would like to have more people on. Yeah. With a wider palette. Yeah. So it's great.
I'm excited. I'm excited for some of your future episodes and to dig into the past ones. I know Amir's coming on.
Yeah, Amir Safar is coming on. Yeah, he'll come on at some point. Another person that we know that you worked with recently. Yeah. But we'll get to that. We'll get to Amir when we get to Amir. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man.